My name is Saul Wordsworth, and this is the IVT Podcast. Hello, I'm Saul Wordsworth, Deputy Editor of IVT International, the world's leading publication for industrial and off-road vehicles in construction, agriculture and mining. Welcome to the IVT Podcast. Since our last episode, the world is slowly seeking a return to work. Countries like China are ahead of the curve, while much of Europe remains further behind. Political imperatives are coming into play, with President Trump pushing hard for the renewal of a working economy in advance of the November elections. Meanwhile, here in the UK, where numbers are the highest in Europe, caution is the watchword, though construction as a whole remains fairly bullish. Our main interview this week is with Jon Pope, one of the world's leading industrial designers. Jon has worked with a number of OEMs, including John Deere, Volvo CE and Mahindra, and we'll be talking about the impact Covid-19 might have on vehicle design. But first, it's time for news and conversation with Tom Stone, IVT editor, live from his luxury home on England's south coast. Let us begin. By the way, I just thought I should tell you what I did last night.
Go on then.
I bet you can't guess what I did last night, Thomas.
Did you have a party on Zoom?
No, I participated in a quiz, a Christmas quiz. This was my friend's idea of a joke. He was wearing a Christmas sweater. He had an inflatable Christmas tree behind. And he said, since none of us know what day it is, it doesn't really matter what kind of quiz we do. So here's a Christmas quiz. And we all groaned and moaned.
Yeah, I did read a news story very early in the lockdown, which disappeared very quickly. I don't know if it's still on the BBC website, but there was a brief news story about how people were putting up Christmas decorations for the lockdown to sort of to make things a bit more jolly, because it was a bit like Christmas. And I don't know, it just seemed completely erroneous to me. I mean, like, I never saw any Christmas decorations going up. No. I have just been like the journalist's friend who did it.
Well, I don't know about you, but I wish it could be Christmas every day.
And that is what this is like, isn't it?
It is, except with all the good bits taken out and all the washing up and the indigestion slotted back in.
Yes, well, we have less food, but, you know.
Speak for yourself.
More time to watch TV. No, and less time to watch TV. It's nothing like Christmas, essentially.
So, Tom, is there anything that has struck you in the IVT off-highway news in the last few weeks since we last convened?
Since we last spoke, yeah. It's only been a couple of weeks, hasn't it, I think, since we last spoke.
It's actually 4, I think.
Is it 4 weeks already?
Yeah, I know.
Way. Well, time flies.
Well, it really does. When every day is the same.
Yes. And then perhaps it's no surprise then, and we should be grateful for this, that it does seem as though we are moving into a new phase of this. I mean,
yes.
Last time we were talking about lockdowns and closures and production lines at a standstill and only really a handful still running. But now it seems that we are moving through into this next phase of people are starting to think about restarting. Some production lines are restarting completely, and we're starting to think about defining the new normal. That seems to be where we're going. Would you agree?
That's a good way of putting it. I mean, I suppose that our industry is simply reflecting the wider world. We've had a time to absorb this shock to our system, and now it has become the new normal, and people are working out what to do within
those confines.
Exactly. So we had C&H Industrial recently, didn't we? Just in the last couple of days, announcing that it was resuming manufacturing operations across its plants. More than 2/3 of the company's 67 plants are already operational.
Yes.
More than 75% in Europe and 60% in North America. So
that's right.
That people are getting back to work, with social distancing in place, I'm sure, and trying to now sort of work through this into this new normal, as we say. And I suppose supply chains will still be a potential issue, but I don't know where we sit with demand. Is there going to be a backlog now of machines that are in demand? There was a pause, but I suppose many construction projects continued right through the sort of heart of the lockdown, and now more are restarting. So it could be that OEMs are going to be struggling to keep up with demand in the short term now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is perhaps one of the great unknowns, isn't it? At this stage, we don't. It's a known unknown. We don't know whether demand will be up or down. It could be considerably up, or it could be noticeably down. Actually, talking of the construction industry being at work, remaining at work, did you see that CEA, that's the Construction Equipment Associations of UK, published their Covid-19 survey last week? They revealed that 10% of those that responded said their production hadn't been affected by the pandemic. It was business as usual. 72% said working levels were reduced. 18% had temporarily closed their business, which I thought was interesting.
It is interesting, isn't it? Yeah, the 10% particularly interesting that weren't affected at all.
Yeah.
Because you read the news and you'd think that literally everything has stopped, but clearly it didn't. And more is now restarting. And I suppose it all now depends on how well we can adapt to this new normal, and how effectively we can avoid a second peak. I suppose that's what governments are fearful of. Another, if social distancing is not observed, then the virus comes roaring back and we have to go back into lockdown again, which would be hugely damaging in many ways. But let's just be optimistic for a minute, as I like to be, say that doesn't happen, and we do manage to sort of restart with social distancing. Obviously, capacity will be down, but nevertheless, the sort of fundamentals, it wasn't like the world economy was, it was perhaps weaker than many people would have liked, but there wasn't like some kind of world recession going on, a few months ago. So it could be that we economically, bounce out of this and slowly get back to a place of cautious growth within a couple of months, even if we're being extremely optimistic. I suppose the other thing that we're looking into our crystal balls here.
Yeah, speak for yourself, but yeah.
What's going to happen? Demand is one thing, but will there be a demand for a different type of vehicle?
That is interesting. Sorry to interrupt you there, Mr. Thomas Stone.
That's all right. I was just thinking about the story from last week about RCT automating that Caterpillar loader in the mine vehicle, I think it was, wasn't it?
That's right.
Automation added, as I think we've discussed before, automation perhaps could be even more in demand with social distancing measures in place. Automation's going to get even more of a boost than it was. Everyone's been talking about automation quite excitedly for a while, but this really could be the time when automation is not just a nice to have, it's a need to have.
Well, I mean, that was a very interesting story on ivtinternational.com, which we both know. And funnily enough, vis-a-vis automation, I will be discussing that very subject with the legend that is Jon Pope straight after we finish this conversation. on the podcast.
Excellent. Yes, I'm looking forward to hearing that. Jon, of course, has been a long-time contributor to IVT, and I know his concept vehicles are hugely popular. And we're looking forward, of course, looking a little bit further into the future to the off-highway annual coming in October, where we're going to have. It's had a little break, but the design challenge will be back, and I know Jon Pope is getting involved in that, and a few other designers as well.
Say no more, Tom. Say no more. That gets central billing in the podcast.
Okay, right. I'm stomping all over Jon's ground there, but I'm certainly looking forward to that. Both what Jon has to say and also the designs themselves.
Oh, is that your glamorous wife coming in again, or is it one of your 17 children?
Yeah, she always likes to come in during the podcast.
Hello, Sophie. Don't be shy. Don't be shy. Come and say hello.
Here she comes.
Here she comes. Hello.
Hello.
Can I have your autograph, please, remotely?
Sure. Yeah, £5. Can you do PayPal?
Don't call me pal. Tom, thanks so much for your time. Once again, I know that time is money. And money's very important to you, so let's leave it there. Speak next time. Bye.
I don't think time is my money. Time is someone else's money.
Tom Stone there, IVT editor and still one of the good guys. Now it's time for the main event, my interview with legendary industrial designer Jon Pope. I hope you enjoy it. See you on the other side. Jon Pope, it's a pleasure having you on the IVT podcast.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I see you as a friend of the show, not a friend of this show per se, but a friend of IVT International. I think you've been contributing and reading for perhaps a decade.
Oh, a lot. Since, let's see, I discovered IVT Magazine when I started working for Walter Dorn Teague Associates back in 1999. Mm-hmm. And my boss, and he's actually one of my mentors, Larry Sliker, had, from the very first issue, which I believe was it 1992, I think? I'm trying to remember now.
The year I was born.
Yes, exactly. I think that was the first year. But anyways, he had from then all the way up to 1999 when I first started working there, and I had never encountered any magazine like it before. This is long days before Google and the internet, what it is now, basically. So here was this wealth of information and design specifically for heavy equipment.
I'm going to have to stop you there, Jon. Otherwise, it will sound like we paid you.
No, I mean it really was. It was kind of like it was the go-to everything from that point on, basically for design associated with heavy equipment.
What I would like to do is I would like to ask you whether you'd had any thoughts and reflections on your area of expertise, which is industrial vehicle design, and how you think COVID-19 might conceivably impact the design of such vehicles, both in the short and the longer term.
Well, I can see that in a couple of different sides, I guess. I think a lot of it, before I even get to that, I guess I think it's more of what's really going to happen with all of this, and is this really going to change everything, or is it okay? We come up with a vaccine in a year or a year and a half, and we quickly forget everything and go back to business as usual. So. On that scenario, then I see nothing changing. Basically, on probably more realistic scenario, I think there's going to probably be a lot of change from all the way from manufacturing, all the way up to operator interface and whatnot. And the operator interface side, I don't know how much it's going to really change, because on the sense that heavy equipment, for the most part, you got one person in an operator cab. He's pretty much isolated. it's not really, from that standpoint an issue. But then there are also issues of you might not be the only person using that piece of equipment that day. Unless you're the owner operator and you're the only guy using it, great. But if you're not, then there might be some sanitary issues that might come into play. And then, of course, you could go down a crazy path too, in the sense of in the long run, well, what are these type of flu situations going to incorporate? Are there going to be worse ones where you might have to worry about more air quality than you do now, per se, in a cab? So, in other words, with like measles, the air can stay aerosol, or the air can stay infected for a long time, and so if something like that happens, then that might even be more of an issue with, how do you air out a cab quickly, basically, something along those lines.
I'm curious to get your take on whether you think the pandemic may hasten the introduction of autonomous vehicles.
Well, the reality of I see with autonomous equipment is it's inevitable. It's coming. It's going to be here. But the question is when. Mm-hmm. And is what you see in the media and what everyone is presenting in their marketing presentation is that we're going to be there tomorrow. But the reality is we're not even. I don't say we're not even close, but there's still a lot of hurdles that need to be accounted for. And that's not just autonomous, I would say, with heavy equipment. That's even just with automobiles. And I think the automobiles are going to have to come first, probably. I think the issue on the heavy equipment side is going to be a couple of things. Number one, it has to be built 2.5 times of what it can take as far as on the engineering side. So just taking something out of automobile technology and thinking you can throw it into heavy equipment, as far as reliability and being exposed to the environments, and as far as is it going to be serviced or is it not going to be serviced, neglect, so on and so forth. Those are all issues that you multiply times 10 basically in the heavy equipment world.
Okay.
Obviously, companies are every OEM is working on that right now. I mean, it's not like it's going to be something that they're going to wait for the auto industry to do it.
Sure. But you don't think that this situation will necessarily accelerate the introduction or the R&D?
Well, the R&D is already going on, I think, at full blast. I mean, that's already there. I don't know if you could go that much faster or not with it. It's the trying to come up with every absolute scenario is what they're trying to do right now with autonomous, essentially, equipment, and that goes with cars and heavy equipment. Mm-hmm. And in many scenarios, in small areas and whatnot, they can do that, basically. So in other words, in a controlled environment, say like in a mining situation where it's closed off to the public, you can do things like that, basically.
Yeah.
The problem is that, okay, well, what about something on roadside, construction zone, something along those lines? That's going to be a long way off, I think, because the issue is that if something happens, who's responsible? Mm-hmm. Is it the operator? Is it the owner? Is it the insurance company? Is it the the manufacturer, basically?
In response to my first question, you said, maybe we'll just go back to normal, but I think that won't be the case. And in fact, it'll affect all kinds of different tiers or levels of production, the design, the manufacture. So maybe we could go back and you could talk about some of the ways in which you think the current situation will affect this industry.
Yeah, well, definitely on the manufacturing side. And I think more on the sense of an economic standpoint, from a supply standpoint, what is the economy going to call for? That's going to be a big drive, basically. And then on top of that, is this going to be a bumpy road that we're going to have to deal with, from here on in, or at least for the next, say, 5 years until we really figure out a good system where it's life back to normal and we don't have to worry about this constant shutdown factor. Heavy equipment is related to very reciprocal industries as it is already for the most part.
Yeah.
That are highly affected by the economy. I mean, the building industry is a huge factor for heavy equipment for the most part. So, I mean, there are things though that, and not to get political or anything, but there are things that could be done that could help the heavy equipment industry out while helping country out at the same time too. And that's just massive infrastructure program basically that's so badly needed. And that's something that it's a win-win situation essentially. There's going to be some bad things happening if things don't start to get upgraded and whatnot.
I was going to ask you how you yourself as a designer, how you are affected, how you have been affected so far, and how you expect the impact to be in the longer term.
Well, right now everyone's got a lot of things on hold, so I'm kind of twiddling my thumbs at the moment with my clients.
Yeah, I can see you literally twiddling your thumbs there.
Yeah. And it's life has to go on, essentially, and it's not, even an upgrade for something can take anywhere from a year to a year and a half. A new product, you're talking about a year and a half to 2 years, from ground up or something like that. So companies, they still have to just keep on chugging along.
How have you been passing your Corona time in a professional sense? I know that you've been working on and mocking up some interesting concept vehicles.
Yeah, I've been doing that. I had no excuse to procrastinate on that stuff. It's funny, that bulldozer concept that I sent you. I actually started that back in December, and Con Expo was coming up, and I had 2 clients I was doing some marketing stuff for, so they had me going like gangbusters all the way up to Con Expo, basically. And so I didn't really get to finish it, and so that was a good excuse to work on that, essentially.
Since the floor is yours, what would you say are the hallmarks of good industrial design, or a well-designed industrial vehicle?
I think, it goes to this, and it's a buzzword, and it's called perceived quality.
Say that again, sorry?
Perceived quality. An example would be, say you take 2 tractors, and for the most part, they cost the same amount of money to make. They do the same job for the most part. But one tractor essentially is, it's not exactly easy to operate. It's not easy to maintain, essentially, from a daily maintenance standpoint. It's a pain in the butt to check everything. And then the other tractor essentially is more comfortable to operate. You get longer, more comfortable operating hours out of it, basically, so you get better productivity out of the operator. Serviceability is easier, so daily maintenance is not a hassle, so it's actually done instead of just being ignored, basically.
Sure.
And the piece of equipment that's no fun basically looks like it's made in somebody's basement, and the piece of equipment that essentially ticks off all the marks actually looks like there's some thought put to it, and was made in a manufacturing facility. Which piece of equipment is the customer going to gravitate towards, at least from the very beginning?
Sure.
Obviously, the the perceived quality.
Yeah.
But then you have to back up that perceived quality with actual quality.
Yeah, of course.
So that's, and if you break that down to, so what does that mean? So with, as far as industrial design, it means involving industrial design from the very beginning, so that you're bringing in this perceived quality without adding manufacturing costs. You're using manufacturing technology and techniques to, if anything, try to bring the cost down wherever you can, essentially.
Sure.
You're bringing in the human factors from the very beginning, as opposed to trying to force the human factors in the end to fit around your engine package and everything else that goes around with it.
Yeah.
So it's doing that from the beginning, as opposed to trying to make it work in the end.
It would be remiss of me not to mention the IVT Design Challenge for 2021. We've rebooted it for next year.
Yes.
I know that you've been involved in the past. What is your experience of the Design Challenge?
It's all good, The fight, I kind of have to laugh at it. It always usually comes when you don't have time, obviously, because that's how it always works out.
Yeah. So
Prime time
now.
Yep. And that's actually kind of a good thing too, because I think that time and pressure actually does help with creativity, basically, because it forces you to do things sometimes. Of course, you can always look back then, I wish I'd had, one more day, one more week, whatever. I could have done this and that and this and that. That's always the case. But it's also, it's an excuse to do something off the side, basically. That's, if it's your passion, then it's for an example, it's here's a problem, basically, and what's the solution? And so it's kind of an excuse to come up with a solution for that and spend a whole bunch of time, essentially, on something that probably will never be manufactured or come to terms or whatever.
But you are showcasing yourself to the industry.
Well, it's you're on your own, and part of it too. You're not also you don't have a bunch of bean counters saying, hey, no, you can't do this, you can't do that, so on and so forth. It's more of like, all right, well, here's what I would do situation. And
the American phrase, paying it forward. So you're investing your time in something that may pay dividends in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because that's what it comes down to, because at the very least, you get a portfolio piece out of it at the end. And you also have something that's published in an international magazine that's world renowned, basically, in the industry. And that's a plus. You can't go wrong there, basically.
Sure.
And you're also showing you're showing other folks, your ideas and whatnot, and the way you think, and so on and so forth. So there's a little bit of self-promotion going on there too.
Sure, of course. In fact, I should take this opportunity just to read out the challenge for 2021. Here's the wording. Design an industrial vehicle that includes new styling and functionality that takes full advantage of existing and possible future trends in electrification. I don't know whether you're going to be submitting a design for next year, because you're the daddy. Maybe we should exclude you, Jon. But can I just say it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the IVT podcast. Always good to talk to you, Jon.
Thanks, Saul. It's an absolute pleasure, and I'd say anytime.
I hope you enjoyed the interview with Jon. If you want to know more about the Design Challenge or wish to submit a concept for consideration, contact us via our website, ivtinternational.com, tweet us at ivt_mag, or email ivt@markallengroup.com. Thanks for listening. Join us again soon for another edition of the IVT podcast. That's it from me. Until next time. The IVT podcast is a Mark Allen Group production. Please please like and subscribe. If you're interested in appearing on the podcast, reach us via our website, ivtinternational.com, or email ivt@markalangroup.